Thank you everyone for joining this webinar on remote proctoring, how examinees cheat and how to catch them. So this will be a discussion from two perspectives from leaders in the industry. On one hand, we have Monitor EDU, who focuses on live human proctoring. So they're the type of organization that works with high stakes exams where you might be taking like a medical certification, and the candidate will start the exam, but before they do that, they have to actually talk to a live proctor. They got to show their ID card, they got to pick up their camera, show it around the room. Sometimes they have to use two cameras. The way the Monitor EDU works is that they can have the webcam coming on your face like this, but also tell them to stream on their phone and go put that phone on the table in the back of the room or on a bookshelf so you get a great view. And on the other hand, we have Raúl Rivera from SUMADI, Executive Director of SUMADI. And SUMADI provides AI-based, highly scalable, yet secure remote proctoring services. And he's going to tell you about some of the things that they do to catch illicit activities from test takers. So with that, I'll let each of them introduce themselves. Just do an introduction before we get into talking about remote proctoring. Let's start with Raúl.
Hi, Nathan. Nice to meet you. And hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to talk about, what we're doing in the proctoring industry. So my name is Raúl Rivera, and I represent SUMADI, and we're focused on the AI-based proctoring in the industry. We have been able to service many customers around different geographies, particularly focusing on Latin America and Europe. We also have some footprint and some customers in the Middle East and South Africa. Happy to talk about our experience with you guys. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Patrick?
My name is Patrick Ochoa, COO of Monitor EDU. I've been proctoring via Live Proctor for the last 5 years. We work across North America in various medical boards, as well as government organizations, as well as the professional testing and licensure. So pleasure to be here and talking about how we catch cheating and prevent cheating.
Thanks. And Don? And then Don, I still don't see your video.
Yeah, my apologies for not being on video. I'm a little unprepared as far as my appearance goes today, so you get the black screen. But anyways, just to go, I mean, Patrick and I started Monitor EDU together. So I mean, my history is a long history in the industry. I've been in the industry really since the beginning in 2008 in terms of remote proctoring services. So started ProctorU, founded that company, grew it through about 2016, stepped away. Patrick was actually with me at Monitor EDU since about 2011, I think 2012. I think our 10-year anniversary is coming up here in June. So he came with me. In fact, there was a famous day that he and I were working for another company in the assessment industry, and we're having a beer at the Chicago airport, and Patrick looked at me and said, "When are we doing our own thing again?" And so Monitor ED was born, and we've been running with it. And it's been real fascinating to watch all the different changes in remote exam delivery, remote proctoring. It was a new thing 15 years ago. It's not so new anymore. And it's been a real challenge to really focus on the ways that students can cheat or test takers can cheat, because they're certainly getting a lot more bold, and it'll be really interesting to discuss that today.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And then let's take a couple minutes for each of you to talk a little bit about your solution. What is the approach that you take? What are the clients that you work with? What are they looking to do when they say they want to catch cheaters or keep examinees honest? And what are the things that you put into place to make sure, like how do you do ID checking? How do you make sure that the workspace is clear? How do you make sure there's not two people, that sort of thing? Let's start back with Raúl for that.
Yeah, thank you, Nathan. So as I said at the beginning, we are focused on the AI-based proctoring, and we have developed a tool that is very robust in terms of artificial intelligence in the detection of biometrics to actually deter and detect if students are making or presenting suspicious behavior. So the deterrent mode is something that is really important to us. So what do? We are a secure browser and application that you download into your computer. And once you download it, we use a very robust integration, and we are compliant with standards from the industry, from the IMS. We're using LTI. So we integrate to different platforms, right, around that could either be commercial LMSs or testing platforms. And or we also can connect to homegrown systems, right? So we have a very robust layer of integration. But the way in which SUMADI acts is as an application, a secure browser that you download into your computer. Once it's downloaded through an integration, you're able to enter through your platform where the exam is, right? And once you enter, then SUMADI gets activated, let's say. So we start using biometrics, particularly, we're very focused on identifying a student using artificial intelligence before they get into the exam, right? So we authenticate them, and we have a multi-factor authentication method where we use either facial recognition, typing pattern recognition, we're about to release voice recognition, and we are able to combine the three of them or use just one of them independently. Also, as you were mentioning at the beginning, as some of our colleagues are using other mechanisms to identify the ID card, we are also able, using artificial intelligence, to detect specific words and validate the photograph of a person in an ID card that we also can use to authenticate a person towards an exam, right? Once that is done, right, the student is taken directly to the exam experience. And during the exam experience, we enable artificial intelligence in many aspects. One of them, obviously, is the facial recognition. So we take photographs constantly, and this can be at different intervals that can be configured for each particular exam. And each photograph actually detects several things because we're using object detection as well. So we detect the face and we validate if that student is the person who's supposed to be, because when it comes to ways of cheating, and you're talking about remote examinations, it's like common sense for students to try to use impersonation as a way of cheating. So in other words, they would use another person to impersonate them to take the exam. So you need to validate with biometrics that that person is who that person is supposed to be, right? But also what we're doing with the camera, the frontal camera, is that we're validating the environment. We're validating if there's another person behind them. We're validating if there are objects that aren't supposed to be. You can classify those objects. Like for instance, if a student is not supposed to have a book or supposed to have a phone or a notepad, sorry, an iPad, sorry, that is detected, that is flagged. So that is also something that we are using nowadays. Now we are also about to release what you just mentioned, Nathan, that our colleague Patrick and his team are using, which is a second camera. So we're basically right now just about to release a second camera using your phone through a session actually that integrates with a QR code into your desktop application. What this does is that we also use photographs to do inferencing and detect objects and basically supervise the entire environment during the examination. We've seen that students are very creative when it comes to online education and remote examinations, right? So having a tool that could actually help to see the environment constantly during the examination is also very valuable. In addition to that, there's some other tricks that students might want to use when it comes to cheating. And so for instance, they might want to open another application and they want to probably go to the internet and browse for a particular topic and basically do a copy paste. So what we do with SUMADI, as it is a lockdown browser as well, we block other applications, but this is also selective, right? So an institution can decide which applications are to be open or are authorized to be open during an examinations and which ones are not, right? So this is also something very configurable. And if there's an intention or actually an action of opening an application, then SUMADI would flag that and stop that. So we automatically are collecting data as in real time from what's going on in each particular exam, and we're feeding that information immediately to the cloud, right? So we are a SaaS solution and we're very scalable. We've been able to actually supervise more than 40,000 exams a day during a weekend of 4 hours directly. So we are basically leveraging the capacity of our infrastructure that sits on top of AWS. And that information, as I said, it's a lot of information that gets processed, organized, and then put into reports on the cloud that a supervisor or an authorized person can actually go into and look in real time and see how those students are behaving during an examination. That, Nate, is in general terms how we operate.
Thank you, Raúl. That's a great summary of how your clients anticipate the students misbehaving and procedures and software you put in place to deter it. Patrick or Don, one of you want to talk a little bit about Monitor EDU solution and how you tackle those similar problems?
Yeah, sure. So with us, we use a different approach with the live proctors, as well as we utilize a 2-camera solution. So normally we'll use the candidate's webcam as well as a secondary device. Primarily it's the mobile phone, but it could be an iPad, it could be a second computer with a webcam. But that second device gives us the ability to fully see the testing environment. We're able to look under the desk, make sure the candidate's not pulling out any resources that they're not supposed to. We're able to see if they get up from the workspace, if they're supposed to or not supposed to, view the area for unscheduled breaks, what have not. And then we also work with the assessment company to work with them on a lockdown browser. So we have the actual testing device that is secured during the exam. So our proctors just need to focus on the physical device. For some of our clients that don't use a lockdown browser or secure browser, we just use screen sharing technology to view the candidate screen in real time. And if we need to intervene, the proctors, that's a great thing about having a live person there. They can interact on the spot, stop the action from occurring. Depending on the rules of the institution, some will let you just document the incident and continue. Others will have you shut down the exam or suspend it until the client makes a decision from there. So basically, it's a little bit of different approach than my colleague Raúl here, but the live proctor way is our way. Don, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah. I mean, the key really, we're designed more for higher stakes assessments, where, there's a couple of different elements. One is starting with that, it's a high stress environment. So having that human element, having somebody there, a proctor to guide the candidate through to make sure everything's set up properly, to assure 100% that they're meeting all of the requirements within the room and the environment, ahead of time. I mean, we're going through, talked a little bit about ID, we're going through the ID checks. We've got things recorded on videos. We work with our partners in terms of making sure that there are unique credentials for each candidate. We've got the permanent record. So if there's anything after the fact to address a proxy tester, we can address that. But the key really is once you get them into the test, it's that ability to intervene and stop things when it's happening. So, or to question things when they're happening. So something appears odd, the proctor notices the behavior that shouldn't be there. They can intervene into that assessment with our partners. We can stop the assessment. So with assessment systems, we're linked up to you guys, on a Slack channel throughout the entire assessment. If there's ever an issue, we can pause it, we can investigate, we can talk to the client to get their determination on what we need to do. And then we can proceed forward. So that communication that we've all got, it's not just a single proctor who's watching a candidate. It's a whole organization that's focused on that candidate and all of the candidates to make sure that the assessment at the end of the day is reliable and fair, and that we know that everybody followed the same set of rules. And so it's dynamic in that sense. But yeah, it's really designed for higher stakes, and I'd say probably 80 to 90% of our clientele are outside higher education. So,
yeah. Thank you, Don. Yeah, I think that provides a great comparison of the two approaches here. There's certainly discussion going on within the field of AI versus live proctoring, which is the best, but I think there's absolutely room and situations for both of them. I do work with Don and Patrick on high stakes medical certifications or financial certifications, things like that, where they might have, 100 people take an exam twice a year on a Saturday morning or something like that. And it's perfectly feasible to use live proctoring in those cases. And of course, the candidates, because it's a certification exam, they might be paying $400 per exam, in which case spending $30, $40, whatever it ends up being for proctoring is not a problem. That's still less than 10% of the cost of the exam. On the other hand, if you're working with, let's say, civil service exams, and you've got a government with limited budget, and they've got continually people applying to take jobs, and they've got 5,000 people coming in per week, that's just not feasible to work with live proctoring in that case. And there's a different type of solution that's needed in those cases, and that's where SUMADI is excellent fit.
Totally agree, Nate. Totally.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about the theme of the webinar, how students cheat and how to catch them. We talked a little bit about the how to catch them piece in terms of the deterrence that you have into place, the software that's in place, the procedures. Let's talk a little bit about specifics. Do you have any stories about? Let's start with the cheating side, and then we'll come and talking about deterrence and policies. Do you have any specific stories from your clients about how candidates have cheated, and what are certain things that would be useful into catching those types of situations?
Yeah, I got a couple of really interesting stories to share, Nate. Just one thing I can say, and this is all the colleagues I've talked to in the industry, we've all been talking about the fact that cheating on online exams has gone up significantly in the last couple of years. And, there's lots of reasons for that. We can get into that a little bit later in the webinar, but just in terms of stories, my two favorite stories, which both happened in the last 3 or 4 months. One of the candidates that we had, he was able to figure out a way around some of the technology, and he was VPNing, and somebody else was actually taking the exam on screen. And so the proctor, a lot of what we do is based on visual, observation, looking at behavior. But this guy got, because in order to pull that off, you've got to be able to, we're watching the screen, we're screen sharing, we're seeing the mouse move, we're seeing them go question to question, but you're also watching the candidate. And the actions weren't syncing up. And so the proctor started really paying attention. And what really gave it away is at some point, he picked up a bag of potato chips, started eating them, and the test was moving forward. And so that was easy. What we realized is, there are people, especially with these higher stakes assessments, are going to try to figure out ways around the technology. And so ultimately we have to make sure that we're also providing that good observation to sync those things up. And it's a challenge for someone to pull that off over a 3-hour exam, because they have to sync up all their actions. And he wasn't able to do it. And he actually wasn't too smart, because you shouldn't be eating potato chips while your thing's moving. So the second story, and this is going to be related to materials later, or rules later. We have a partner where they allow a significant amount of resources to come in, reference of materials and things of that nature. There's a big difference between the test center and remote. In a test center, you can physically look through all of these. You can require that people leave things behind. There's lots of things you can do to really control materials. But in a remote environment, it's very difficult to do that. We can see that they're using those materials. Anyways, this particular guy had gotten hold of an answer sheet. And so he had stuck it in between one of his pages. And the proctor was watching pretty closely as he was going through materials. And she noticed that, even though he had like 6 or 7 workbooks, he was only referring to one workbook, and he was basically trying to hide it every time he went in and looking at the one page. And so she stopped him and said, "I need to see that." And so he played a game with her. He showed her all the other ones. She goes, "No, I want to see the one that you were looking at." And then he kind of fumbled around with it and then threw it off the desk. And then at that point it was out of view. And then he went over and grabbed it off the floor, came back and said, "See, I've got nothing in there." Well, we had enough evidence to ascertain. So really both those cases was technology allows us to see all of those different things, but ultimately it was that proctor observing behavior, just like you would in a test center, that identified that somebody was doing something. So those are two really interesting stories that we've had recently.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Raúl, do you have any specific examples of things that candidates have done with your exam?
Yeah, it's very funny, right? It's sometimes, students get very creative when it comes to cheating, right? As it would happen in a face-to-face environment, it also happens in remote exam and remote environments, right? And I think that they even get more creative. We had one opportunity when we saw that a student was actually continuously looking up to the roof, apparently for no reason, while he was taking the examination, right? It turned out that he actually had created like an answer sheet and that he had pasted on the roof. This is true. And he was actually taking a look at a several amount of answer sheets on the roof, pasted. And what's interesting about artificial intelligence and how it has evolved these days is that it actually can particularly detect behaviors, right? It can detect that I'm biometrically detect my identity and validate my identity, but also it would allow us nowadays to understand or ask the question, why is this person constantly changing the direction of their eyesight, or where his head is actually pointing, right? So we can detect that. And the other thing, yes, I'm looking at comments over there from Catalina. Yes, it's sometimes they're very creative. And that is where, the second camera really comes in very handy, because once you are able to position it in a very strategic location of the room, it can actually detect anything and everything in that room, right? And still we have some challenges. The other thing that we came across was that they found a way to actually plug in a second monitor to their camera. And this was way back a couple of years ago. So they actually plugged in an additional monitor to the computer. And at that point in time, we were just blocking applications, but we were not really addressing, the peripherals in a very strict manner. So what this person did is that with the second monitor, they actually preloaded an answer sheet on the second monitor, and they were actually reading those answers in the examination. So nowadays, what we've had to do is that since we're able to go to the operating system itself, we're able to block peripherals, and we're monitoring even the traffic that comes through the network, right? So those are two very interesting creative ways in which some of our students have found ways to actually do some cheating. We're doing a lot of work in terms of, really getting our operating system capabilities robust enough for us to track all the behavior, right? But this is something that is always going to be a challenge. And one last example, Nate, is that students are using or started to use virtual computers or virtual machines. For those of you who don't know what that is basically they are able to just click on an icon and it opens another sort of computer inside of your operating system, right? So normally we didn't see that as an application that needed to be blocked. So with that, they actually connected to other networks and they were able to bypass some of the operating system restrictions, right? So we've had to do a lot of work in terms of our browser to really go into the operating system and detect everything that is going on behind. Nowadays, students are very tech savvy, right? So it's not only for engineers. Many people in from different faculties and different education streams are very capable of actually understanding how a computer works. So our secure browser really focused on the most technical details that we can think of because students are very creative. So those are three examples, Nathan, that come to mind that we've been able to detect and we have addressed through our solution.
Okay, thank you, Raúl. We have a question in the comments. Is it possible to use a VPN with a lockdown browser? I can say that I think it depends upon lockdown browser. So my platform uses Respondus, white labeled version of the Respondus lockdown browser. And there's actually an option when you publish an exam on our platform, do you want to allow virtual machines or not? I think the VPN is probably something that's probably can't be controlled, but I'm not technical enough to respond to that. Raúl, would you have a response on that for yours?
There are many ways in which a VPN can be enabled in a computer, right? So one of them is actually using an application, right? Like for instance, I have in my computer VPN Express, which is the application that I use to connect to a VPN. We could also use other more commercial and more robust solutions like Cisco, for instance. So what we're doing again is that we are going behind the scenes. We're going through the operating system and we're detecting all these applications that are operating behind. And what SUMADI is doing is that it's blocking them. So application blocking is really important when it comes to lockdown browser. So our lockdown browser really has this robust feature of blocking applications, detecting those applications before the exam is actually activated. And if those applications are running behind the scenes, SUMADI won't give access to the exam, right? Until those applications are actually turned off or closed. And also if they try to open them, SUMADI has like this thing, again, we're going to the operating system. So we actually are able to detect if they want to open them once they are in the examination as well.
Okay, so Catalina's question is, it doesn't detect it unless you specify which application to look for. And yes, I think you're right, is that we can't look for where the web traffic is coming from and block it, but we can scan the computer to see what applications are running, which could be NordVPN or many of the other common ones that are out there, right, Raúl?
That is correct. And that's the second phase. Really monitoring the traffic is something that we have had on the back of our heads right now, but still we have not been able to come up or develop a feature. We're still thinking through it to understand really, because again, we don't want to create an overhead for the CPU of a computer, of a local computer, right? So we want to keep it as lean as possible in terms of processing resources. So we're really assessing what we want to detect in terms of traffic, but it's something that has been on the back of our heads. It could be a second phase of our solution.
Yeah, and then Nate, and the VPN thing is interesting too, because there are situations where that's the way that the candidate has to connect. So there are countries that candidates test in, China comes to mind, where with the internet restrictions, sometimes the only way that they can access the assessment and the different tools and the proctoring tools is to run through a VPN. So for us, the real key, and the other piece of that too, is the more well-known a technology is, the more that people try to break that technology as well. So you've got two different things going. One is that there's a need for VPNs in certain situations. The second one is that these technologies that are well-known are constantly under attack with people trying to figure out how to beat them. So what's important is to be able to identify when somebody's running through a VPN. So you can take a look at the traffic, you can take a look at the IP addresses when they're coming in. So for example, you might have a candidate who's in China and they pop up with a US-based IP address. Okay, clearly they're using a VPN service in order to access it. So it then becomes adding layers of protocols to that on how you deal with that situation. And so it's like most things, it's not one single thing that's going to allow you to try to catch, prevent, and deter. It's really trying to put those pieces together and really making sure you're meeting the needs of those testers. And as Raúl mentioned, I mean, people are getting smarter. So for us in the industry, it's constantly trying to identify where there are holes. And every time we plug a hole, we know someone's going to try to find a new hole. So then we got to go plug it. So it's a number of things that we constantly have to look at and constantly share. So like we have a good relationship with SUMADI. We share information with each other and we talk about things that we all experience. We have that same relationship with other people in the industry so that we can constantly stay ahead of it. Just like in test centers, people figured out ways to come into a test center and cheat. And so the test centers had to change their protocols and things that they did. So we're facing the same thing, and we're trying to balance the needs of the test taker and delivering that exam with the security so we can assure that again, the security is covered at the end.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Let's see, since we're talking a lot about security here, one of the key issues within remote proctoring is privacy. What are your thoughts on balancing privacy with some of the needs for security here? Because we've got our client saying, we need to track everything. We need to get pictures of their faces. We need to get pictures of their ID cards. We need to make sure we have their, let's say, government ID number. There's so many aspects that might go into this. How do you balance that with considerations for privacy?
Yeah, I'd say it depends on two factors. One, the needs of the client, and then the level of the assessments. If it's, say, maybe an entry-level assessment, in my opinion, you don't need to track down that heavy personal type of data, especially from the proctor side, having them collected. I think the assessment tool is better suited for tracking that information, and it could be done either pre-assessment or post-assessment as well, and that would allow the information, if the client truly needs it, to be stored within one system. In terms of recordings and tracking IDs, authorization letters for testing, it's all, what policies do you set in place? What's your video retention? So for us, our standard is a 30-day retention for videos unless the client asks for a longer storage.
I think I think Patrick hit the nail on the head, which it's dependent upon the stakes and the requirements on that, what's appropriate to collect and store. And then the other piece of it comes down to compliance and communication. So, compliance and understanding the different privacy laws within the different states in the US, within the different countries in the world, within the EU, making sure you're respecting that candidate privacy, making sure they understand what it is that you're collecting, giving them the opportunity to be forgotten when the purpose for having that data no longer exists, and then working closely with the client, because ultimately, our view is the client owns that data. And we would like to make sure that we've got very short retention policies, that we provided them the data when they need it. And at that point, we step out. We shouldn't store that data anymore once it's been turned over to the client, because at that point, we don't have any purpose to store it. So it's understanding what's required, what's appropriate, making sure you're in compliance, and then just really having good communication with the client and the candidate.
Yes, I would just that. I mean, first of all, I mean, I'm 100% in agreement with Don and Patrick. I mean, it's the right balance, understanding really what the needs the customer has, but also compliancy with, you know, international policies, right? Like, for instance, what we're doing on our side is that we're getting certified in GDPR, which is I would consider it one of the most robust data protection policies that exist around the world. Basically, or mostly is focused in Europe, but it's the baseline for other data protection policies in other geographies, right? And, you know, understanding how to be compliant there, it's, you know, gives you the proper knowledge to see to know what to do from a security and technology perspective with the tool, right? So we and again, for us to be able to enter to Europe, we had to actually be compliant with GDPR. And on top of that, we're putting a lot of security measures on the perimeter of our tool, particularly in the cloud, right? So we are compliant with those standards, but also we have to understand from each customer what their data retention policy is. And based on that, we also establish processes. So it's not only the technology, but also aligning with the needs of the customer. For some customers, they want us to keep the data for at least 6 months or a year. But for others, you know, they just want us to keep the data stored in our infrastructure for only a month or a week, right? And they actually request evidence that we are actually erasing the data from our infrastructure once the exams have been taken, right? So it depends on the customer. So you have to have the proper balance of being compliant with security policies and with data protection policies, and also align with your customer on an operational perspective to understand what they expect from data retention, right? So it's that perfect balance. And on top of that, what we're doing is that we're also, you know, being very constantly, you know, assessing, you know, technical security issues and threats that are coming out every single time, right? So we constantly have our security teams, you know, assessing the vulnerabilities that our infrastructure has. And again, you know, we live in a cyber world these days, right? So there's a lot of people, hackers, who are constantly trying to, you know, penetrate into infrastructure from different solutions, right? And being in the proctoring industry, you know, we are solutions that are actually concentrating a lot of private data. So we are a target for these people around the world. So we constantly have to be assessing that, and we are constantly, you know, implementing new security measures and working directly with external ethical hackers. And we are, you know, creating new solutions on top of our infrastructure to make it as robust as possible and not dated as possible as we move forward.
Okay, thank you, Raúl. Let's take a step back and think about it from the client perspective, whether it's a university or a certification board or somebody else. What do you guys hear about the things that are the highest concerns for them in terms of threats to test security? You know, are they most concerned about proxy testers having the wrong person take the exam, you know, sending in a substitute? Are they concerned about bringing in materials like the book that Patrick talked about? Are they concerned about having 2 people there? Are they, you know, what are the, when they come to you saying we need remote proctoring, what is it that you hear from them?
It depends, Nate. So it's all those situations are going to be different. So certainly with high stakes, especially with the amount of resources dedicated to creating items, item writing, test security, you know, content theft is always a and so developing, you know, a good process and protocol using the right tools like the Respondus Lockdown browser, all those things help us, you know, mitigate that concern. Certainly they're concerned about, you know, exam rules and making sure that every candidate is following those particular exam rules. You know, at the university level and a faculty level, you know, they're worried about the test getting out, but in many of those cases, they're allowing test takers to take a test over a larger window. You know, so a high stakes assessment, that test typically happens either everybody testing at once or everybody testing a short window. In higher ed, it can be over wide open. And so, you know, a lot of that content theft is really dependent upon them. They're more worried about, you know, unauthorized assistance. You know, is somebody else helping that student? Is that student bringing in materials in? Is that student accessing other websites? You know, there's many websites out there now that you could put a test question into and get the answer. So they're worried about making sure that the person's not going outside of the test to access other items, so they're not bringing notes or cheat notes into it. So I think, with the lower stakes, higher volume things, and this is why Raúl's tools is great, because those are wide open. It's really about, is it the right person, and are they having unauthorized materials? With the higher stakes, it's really a lot more about exam and test security, more traditional, additional items, where we really have to focus on, number one, the test security, and then number two, really the environment, to make sure. So, Raúl?
Yeah, you're right, 100%. I have the same perspective, Donna, from what you say. I would just add that in our case, because we're very strong on technology, our institutions, whether it is the government institution or a higher ed institution, their biggest concern is, are the students going to be able to use the tool properly? Are they going to understand how to log into it? Will they have in-exam support in case they run into a problem because they cannot properly load the tool, or the exam is not loading properly? So that is why, even when we are an AI-based solution, we have a robust customer care team that is actually helping and working together with the support team of the institution itself during the examinations, right? And we do a lot of pre-work before each exam to be able to enable students and also faculty or supervisors to understand how to use the tool and allow them to have a successful experience. The other thing that I've been able to note out is that, and this is coming directly from the institutions, but also directly from students, is that they get nervous, and we don't want to impact the academic outcomes of a student, right? So we need to be able to calm down students while they're taking an examination, because once they see that they're being supervised, once they realize that there's an AI behind every single action that they take, they get nervous, and that somehow could impact, and I'm not saying it does, but it could impact the academic integrity or the academic outcome of the assessment. So that is where in-exam support really comes in handy, right? So we have to enable channels where the student is able to actually talk to a person if needed, if they have questions, right? Because even when we're not high stakes exams, as what Don and Patrick supervise, we still, for a student, a particular exam can be very important for him or her, particularly at any point in time of their career, right? So they can get anxious, and our institutions really are asking us to implement any procedure or every procedure possible to really ensure that the student is going to be able to use the tool properly and is going to be able to take the exam at the end of the day, right? So that is one of the things that we've seen that most of our customers are interested in guaranteeing.
Okay, thank you. Patrick, anything you'd like to add?
No, I think both Don and Raúl summarized everything perfectly. So anything else I would add would just be repeating. So no need to do that.
Okay, thanks. We just got a question in the Q&A. Using a mobile phone as a secondary capturing source might be a good idea, but at the same time could bring lots of ingredients to support and proctors. What is the experience you guys have in using it in terms of both technological issues, but then also end user issues and making sure that they're able to do it effectively?
We've been doing it for 5 years, and you certainly learn a lot. I mean, people are really good with their phones. So if you've got the right, application, you make it easy. And I think Raúl said was right. You have to make it easy for them to use it, to load up the video, to get it going. 95% of people don't have an issue. You've always got that 5% that is going to struggle. The proctors, because they do this constantly, they know the support, they know the answers, they know how to advise people to get that up and running on their device. The two biggest problems that we see with the mobile are, number one, the mobiles are great, but the consistency isn't as good, or the stability of the internet connection sometimes isn't as good. And so that's why it's important to have that second camera going, because sometimes you get a drop call because of the area they're in, the Wi-Fi connection, the VPN connection. So you got to make sure the technology, auto reconnects to the phone. And then the other problem, which is really on the user side, is that they don't plug the phone in to the charger. And that's something you put in your protocols. But again, what we've learned over time is have the right backup procedures in place. That's why the second camera is so important, because it creates that redundancy, and it gives you that ability then to figure out, why do you suddenly just lost that connection. But those are, again, less than 5% of the cases you're going to see issues, and we work hard to reduce that number, and we're actually seeing it fall to 1 to 2% now. So.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, that plugging in is an important thing because they're going to be streaming video for maybe 6 hours. So you got to make sure that they're able to do that before they start the exam. Raúl, what have been your experiences in integrating the camera as a second video?
Well, nowadays, cell phones are very robust in terms of technology, and most of them have GPUs, right? But sometimes, the end user device is not as robust as possible as necessary when it comes to the quality of the camera, right? So that's one. And then the other thing that Don mentioned, it's really, really common, particularly in Latin America, where internet connectivity is not as efficient and reliable as it is probably in the US, for instance, right? So those are the two key main aspects. So we've had to actually design a tool and develop a tool, a SUMADI version in the mobile application that actually can respond and adapt to changes in the connectivity, and also be able to understand dynamically the capabilities of hardware that student has, right? So those are the two key main aspects when it comes to second camera that we've identified.
Okay, thank you. We have another follow-up question. Is it possible with proctoring solutions to take the assessment on a mobile phone with the camera running on the mobile phone? Or is it still a situation where it's highly preferred to have them on laptop or desktop with the mobile phone as a second?
So not really. Most mobile phones to this point in time typically only allow you to do single applications up front. And so if you have an application that engages the mobile phone and then you try to take the test on top of that, you're going to lose the camera. Now they're getting the newer iOSs, especially with Apple developing their own chip. I know on the new iPads, for example, they do allow multitasking with the M1 chip. And so that's changing and evolving. So there are other protocols that we use. So someone wanted to take an exam on a mobile device. With most of these things, you need multiple devices to really proctor effectively. Because when you rely on just one device proctor, especially if that device is the test-taking device, then you've got a single point of failure. And so having multiple devices is important. So we could still proctor someone taking a test on a mobile phone if we've got that second camera and we can observe them. Also knowing that as of today, you can't multitask on a phone. And so that gives some level of security. But once the phones have the ability to do that multitasking, which is coming soon, then we can sort of change that up, and we might be able to do an environment where they can take the test on their phone, have the phone camera running, and then still have that second camera to watch them.
Thanks, Raúl.
Yeah, I agree with Don. I mean, right now we've assessed the possibility or opportunity or feasibility of actually allowing students to take exams in a mobile device. And like, for instance, we realized that a lockdown browser cannot operate in a mobile device, right? There's no way to actually allow for that to happen. So what we're recommending to our customers is that if they want to use mobile devices right now at this point in time, they should just consider them as additional support to the entire supervision and proctoring experience, right? We're recommending against it right now to only rely on mobile devices. Mobile devices should only be considered as additional support for supervision, but the main application should run on a computer, on a desktop or a laptop, right? Because of the technology restrictions that we have to actually really ensure that the student won't actually present unauthorized behavior by opening other applications or basically using other software to actually be able to answer questions, right? So we recommend against it. So we're doing as much as we can to understand whether it is on Mac or Windows, what are the options that we have as technology evolves to be able to understand at what point in time we will recommend for an exam to be taken on a mobile device only. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I'd also like to add in the layer of the exam experience itself. I always say that mobile exams don't work very well because a lot of our clients are doing high stakes or high depth testing. So it might be a medical certification where they have to look at x-rays, or it's a financial certification where they've got to read this scenario and look at a screenshot of Microsoft Excel, something like that. and that kind of stuff just doesn't work well on a mobile phone. It's hard to see a whole screenshot of Excel that was taken on a monitor on a tiny mobile phone. So it just doesn't work from the exam perspective.
Yeah, the level of eye strain would just kill me probably within item 2 of that assessment. So just the practicality of trying to do a high stakes assessment on such a tiny screen, a little more daunting than I'd want to do, to be honest.
Yep, exactly. That's what I was thinking. One way that mobile delivery could be useful is in the confirmation testing approach, which is one that's used often with civil service and pre-employment exams. You know, with the certification exam, everybody's taking the high stakes exam once. When you're talking about applying for jobs, they might have 20,000 people take a low stakes version of the exam, maybe on their phone, maybe on their laptop, on Proctor, that sort of thing, and then only, let's say, the top 10% that qualify from that initial exam would then come in and take the proctored version of the exam on a laptop or desktop. And that would allow you to save a lot of money by, you're not proctoring 90% of those people, and they can take it on their cell phones. And yeah, there's more opportunity to cheat then, but if they have the opportunity to cheat and they're still not able to get to the top 10%, that's why they probably don't deserve to do the retake, or whatnot. It's not the retake, then it's the confirmation test. Because then if you did cheat on that initial exam that's unproctored, you might come in and take that second exam that's proctored, and you're going to totally bomb it and therefore not be qualified for the exam. That's the argument with that approach. Okay, do we have any other questions from the attendees? Yeah, I've seen it's growing here. By the way, we did have up to 60 people. There's been people rotating in and out, but I saw that the number logged in did get up to 60. So thank you all for attending today.
Nice.
Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
And thanks, and thanks, Nate, for putting together, and Raúl, thanks. I love sharing information with each other. So, and talking about it, because at the end of the day, we all test delivery. It takes a village, and there's so many different ways to do it, and there's so many different perspectives and client needs, and we both specialize in different parts of the market. So it makes it really easy to have this kind of collaboration, and Nate does a great job of pulling us all together.
I agree with that, Don. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to share a panel with you and, educate the entire industry about this. So thank you again for the opportunity, Nathan.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Since we got a couple minutes here, I'll leave some time for each of you to give some information about your companies and yourselves. Now, somebody can connect with you if they want to learn more, your website, your LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever it is you'd like.
Sure. So yeah, Don Kastner and Patrick Ochoa with Monitor EDU. So our website is monitoredu.com. Our emails are easy. It's just don@monitoredu.com or patrick@monitoredu.com. We're both on LinkedIn. You can find me under under Don Kastner. You can search for me, or you can look at AJU President. So my LinkedIn account goes back to the very beginning, back when I was a university president back in the 2000s. And then Patrick is just Patrick Ochoa.
Yeah,
so,
I'm just boring old Patrick Ochoa.
Yeah, so we're happy to connect.
Okay, thank you. And Raúl?
So I'm actually just putting on the chat, you can actually send us an email to info@sumadi.net, or you can send me a direct message to raul.rivera@sumadi.net. I just posted both email addresses on the chat, and also you can find us at www.sumadi.net, which I also posted on the chat. So happy to get in touch with anybody who's interested.
Okay. Well, with that, thank you to Raúl, Patrick, and Don for the excellent discussion. And thank you again to all of the attendees that joined us today.
Have a good day, everybody. Take care.
Bye, everyone.